Today I want to talk about this double bass setup that I did. This is basically with it's a center design, so it's a little bit more ergonomical. The reason why I went looking for something like this is I was in a car accident. I had some back surgery. Was very hesitant with going back to playing drums and having the double bass set up, traditionally the way it is, putting a little bit more twist on my back. Um, you don't really realize how much that is until you actually switch to something like this. There are a lot of systems out there that you can buy. A lot of them are made to order. They're anywhere from 700 to 1,000 or even more. And this isn't my idea. I'll be honest with you. Um, I found a very similar configuration on a website out there, and they claim that DW built that for them custom. I don't know if that's true. I did reach out to the company to ask them about that, or if they could help with smaller axles and an option for the right hand side of the centerpiece here, this double bass, that axle running in there. If you look at a left hand double bass version, you will see that they actually just flip that tower around in the middle, and everything is just basically a mirror of this, to be honest with you. And it won't work if you buy a left and a right hand double bass setup. And it quite honestly would be just as expensive as just going out and buying one of those other options that's out there on the market. So let me talk about how I built this. There's a couple things that you're going to need. Now let me show you what I purchased. I bought this off of Reverb. You can also, there's these options on eBay and whatnot, but I just got the cheapest one that I could get, and I'll explain why. Really what you need is this left-hand portion here. You can see that axle sticking out there, which is where you would connect the axle between the slave and the master assembly. But this one had some problems, missing some pieces, and it was broken on the pedal, but I didn't really care. What I did was I took it all apart. In addition to that, you'll see that there's an extra piece here. I did go ahead and purchase a base plate that had the rubber on it. Mine didn't have the rubber on the bottom of it, so I didn't want to deal with that. So I found one pretty cheap. If you look closely here, you'll notice that there is some difference between the cam and the spring on the older model versus the newer one. What I did was I took this pedal here off the center assembly, or the main primary. I moved it to the right. I went ahead and I took and grinded down the axle that was on this assembly. I use a Dremel tool. You'll need various tools to take this stuff apart in order to get it right. It's not the best grinding job, but you'll want to take this apart because I put the double chain axle fits perfectly onto even the older model system, and I had to drill some holes in the base plate because the older model only used one screw, the newer uses 3, but then everything else fit just fine. And so the difference between the one I found out there and this one is the spring is on the left hand, you know, basically right here. But one of the problems is that this axle here is not long enough to have the cam for the spring and to attach this axle. And so that's why I used this other assembly over here. The spring is on the right hand side. Honestly, from a mechanical standpoint, there is no difference. I can't feel a difference. It works great. It's not as smooth with the older version as it is with the newer, but you know, I can't really tell much difference at this point. So that worked. The other thing I did is you'll see that I had to make these axles smaller. You need 2 axles. You'll have to go and purchase something. I couldn't find really that many options for used. These things run about $80 to $100 and something dollars. That's the downside. You'll see that I did remove that red portion here. That's the U-joints, if you will. DW does something outside of just removing this pin here. I used a punch to remove that pin, and the assembly did not come apart like I thought it would. I then had to use a torch. So after taking the torch to it, I was then able to spin this around and put a punch through the middle and smack it pretty good, and it came right apart. I also had to heat it up to get these back on. Once I took and I cut this portion of the axle assembly in half, because you don't need all of this length. You just need enough so that you can put a snare drum between your legs. And so the axles only need to be about half the size of the one that comes with this. And besides, I didn't want to cut up the one I bought, the new one, because maybe I'll sell this one day, and I wanted to have the pieces to be able to put this back together as it was originally manufactured. So just something to be aware of. You will need to thread one end here. I just put one set screw in it. I didn't figure I needed all of this, you know, 4. We'll see, because there's not going to be that much adjustment. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell. It is a 1/4 inch tap that you'll have to use. You know, drill that hole, tap it. You'll have to obviously drill through one side of the axle, this portion of the assembly. Once you cut it in half, you won't have that hole on the other end, so you'll have to drill that hole. I found it easier to use a drill press and then just heat this up, put the assembly together, and then drill it right through that hole there, and then put the pin back in. Outside of that, hopefully you find this useful, and it can help you save quite a bit of money. Definitely if you already have one of these sitting around, you can just buy the older double bass setup. They tend to go for a little bit less than $100, but you can probably get something like I did for, you know, $40 or $50 that might have some issues, and you just need a few select pieces. But hopefully you find this helpful, and I had fun doing this, and looking forward to not having as much torque on my back. Thanks for listening.